that's how much they cared for one another. He actually let him escape so that he wouldn't have to be executed. So that's one story that kind of sits with me a lot and that's the story that I like to tell people when they automatically assume it's a religious war, because that couldn't be further from the truth.
Hey guys, this is Agnibarna
and Maira.
Welcome to the Hidden Coconuts podcast,
the show that dives deep into the lives of us coconuts, brown on the outside, white on the inside.
Or in other words, those of us who identify as both South Asian and North American, juggling two identities, contemplating how they coexist.
If you empathize, or you were just in the neighborhood, stick around and let's get cracking our inner coconuts. Welcome back to a special episode of the Hidden Coconuts. We're joined by Mariam Meddoui, a Palestinian Muslim student who lives in Canada. Her family is from Gaza, and today she'll be sharing some insight into the genocide that's been happening in Palestine. We go back to high school. In fact, she was the first hijabi I had in my homeroom class, and so right away, I felt a connection. But she's here to share her story. And yeah, I will give the floor to you, Mariam.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys for having me. Yeah, Maira was the first hijabi I saw in homeroom drama class of grade 9. And we've been close since then. Maira and Aggie invited me on here to kind of share my story and kind of shed light on what's happening in Palestine right now. I think it's important to go over the history first and foremost, because a lot of people don't know the history, and a lot of people are uneducated because they only believe this West narrative, the narrative that, the United States and Canada want you to believe. And the reality is that Palestine existed long before the state of Israel was even created. Up until 1917, Palestine was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And so Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews were all living in peace amongst themselves. They were friends, they were friendly. And I think that's really important for people to know, because people automatically assume that this is a religious war. It's Jews against Arabs, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's this whole Zionist ideology. That's what we have a problem with. Now, there are so many Jews who aren't Zionists, and we have no issues. We love our Jewish brothers and sisters. We love our Christian brothers and sisters. Like, this is not by any means a religious war, and it never has been. But anyways, so pre-1917, Palestine was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. It was flourishing, it was thriving, people were living peacefully and in unison. And then after World War I ended in 1918, the British took over and they conquered Palestine. So it was referred to as British Palestine or British Mandate of Palestine. And from when it became British Palestine, there was a promise made to the Jews, basically telling them that we are going to give you your own land. This was a promise to them. I think the saying was a land without people for people without land. However, Palestinians were living in that land, at the time. So they were promised a land that wasn't theirs, and a land where people who were native to that land were already living on it. So I think that's important, because people don't realize that Palestine existed, people were living, people were flourishing. It was a peaceful country. And before the British took over, that's when kind of all the problems started. Now, I kind of want to fast forward to 1948, which was the Nakba. Nakba in English translates to catastrophe. Now, that was when 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their land. So that's when Israel took over 78% of the historic Palestine. So we don't have a picture, but if you see a map of Palestine, you can see the color difference and the amount of land that Israel took over. And it's considered a catastrophe. Like, that's when most Palestinians, they had to flee towards Egypt, towards Syria, Jordan, and find refuge somewhere else. So my maternal grandparents are both from Palestine. My grandmother is from Jaffa, and my grandfather is from Gaza, or Gaza. And my grandfather was in Egypt studying around this time. and he was denied his right to return to Palestine. So he had to stay in Egypt, was forced to stay in Egypt. He lost his right to return to his own home country, which can't even imagine. Like, we're living in Canada, we pick up one day, want to come back, and someone tells us, sorry, you're not ever allowed to enter your country again. Like, that's something I don't think any of us would ever even be able to imagine. Now, my grandmother at this time, she was an infant. She was forced to flee. So her mother took her and her 6 or 7 kids and flee to Egypt. So they seeked refuge in Egypt. And again, my grandfather was forced to stay in Egypt as well. They both met in Egypt, and my grandmother started to work in Egypt, and then they moved to Libya for better work opportunities, and then moved back to the Emirates, and then after that, ended up in Canada. But they were kind of all over, all over the Middle East because they weren't allowed to return to their homeland. So that's kind of my personal story. My grandfather, all of his brothers, all my mother's uncles and aunts are still in Gaza. They are still living in Gaza right now. We have lost a few family members in the war, and it's also unfortunate because when you ask a Palestinian or someone from Gaza, have you lost someone from the war? You actually have to specify which war, because there has been so many wars in Gaza. You have to ask them, which war did you lose which person? So in 2014, we lost my mom's uncle and one of my cousins. In 2019, we lost 2 more of my cousins. And then in this war, someone who was very close to us, who was our neighbor in Gaza, him and his child passed away. And it's really unfortunate right now because right now, the mindset in Gaza is when it's not a matter of if we're going to get killed, it's a matter of when, because the IDF, Israeli military, the occupation, the apartheid, it's absolutely ruthless. It's very, very unfortunate, but I kind of feel like I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but that's kind of the history around the topic. So a lot of people don't realize that Palestine existed long before Israel even came to be, and it consisted of Jews, Christians, and Muslims all living together peacefully. Another kind of story, just to kind of highlight the peacefulness and sense of community between all 3 of the religions. My great-grandmother, so she told my mother so many stories about Palestine and what happened, and she used to tell us stories as we were small. I just lost her this past February, but she used to tell us, so many stories of how she kind of lived through it and just her personal experiences. So my great-grandmother, her brother, when he was younger, was a fighter against the British Mandate. He was captured by the British Army, I think, when he was 17 years old, and he was imprisoned. And he was actually supposed to be executed. And then at the time, my great-grandmother's family were fighting hard because at the time he was a minor. You couldn't be executed until you were 18 years old. And he was a minor, so they were trying to fight his execution. Now, he's sitting in prison, and his prison guard was a Jew, and also a Jew that knew him very well. So basically, this Jewish prison guard, who has 7 kids, and that's important for the next point, basically told him, listen, I'm going to open the cell. You're going to leave. You're going to escape. And I'll put one of my kids in the cell and make up a story to kind of be like, I don't know what happened. So that's how much they cared for one another. He actually let him escape so that he wouldn't have to be executed. So that's one story that kind of sits with me a lot and that's the story that I like to tell people when they automatically assume it's a religious war, because that couldn't be further from the truth. So right now, after, the Nakba, and then the Nakba was in 1948, that's when 78% of Palestine was became occupied by Israel. In 1967 became that was referred to as the Naksa. So that was the kind of military siege on both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are basically the 2 remaining areas of Palestine, but they're under military occupation. So basically, Israel took most of the areas that were around the Mediterranean Sea. So they got most of the water and, the beautiful landmarks, everything like that. And there's a very, very small strip that's by the water, which is the Gaza Strip. And then on the other side is the West Bank. So the West Bank consists of Jerusalem, Ramallah, those areas. And these areas, even though these are where Palestinians are living, it's under military siege, it's under military occupation. So Gaza is very small. It's probably the size of London, if not smaller. And then the West Bank is slightly bigger, but both areas are very, very tough to live in. But the West Bank, because it's bigger, anytime you want to travel, anytime you want to go somewhere, number one, you can't drive on the same road. So Israelis and Palestinians have different roads they can drive on, and there's military checkpoints. So if you're caught driving on the wrong highway, you could potentially get arrested or have some sort of penalty because you're not in an area where you belong. There's also checkpoints. So let's say you want to travel to another city, for example, you have to go through these Israeli checkpoints. And these Israeli checkpoints, Palestinians are held in very close spaces, overcrowded, closed spaces. And they will keep you there for hours and hours and hours just to make you miserable. And it's a very closed space and it's just overcrowded with people. And that's what you have to go through if you want to travel from city to city in the West Bank. So the West Bank, also there is Masjid al-Aqsa, it's a very historical landmark for Muslims. It's one of the most important mosques in the world. I believe there was a while where, like, we as Muslims, we pray towards the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia, but for a while people were praying towards Masjid al-Aqsa because that was the kind of next huge historical landmark. So Israelis know that Muslims in the West Bank will always go and pray there. And unfortunately, it has been targeted so many times by the Israeli Defense Force because they want to target Muslims purposefully who are just simply worshiping and praying in this mosque. So it's just one of the many, many examples of Israeli occupation, torture, apartheid. Like, it's very horrible. But going on from that, I kind of want to talk about what happened on October 7th, because people are just focused on October 7th. You know, so many people who are not educated or weren't aware of this issue will automatically assume that, well, Hamas started it. It started on October 7th. You know, Palestine is just getting what they deserve, which couldn't be further for the truth. It did not happen 2 months ago. It started 75 years ago. So I like to pose the question, well, okay, if 75 years, if a certain military force attacked your father, attacked your mother, attacked your grandparents, you know, bombed your home, arrested you, kept you in jail for years without conviction, without anything, and took everything from you, how would you respond? You're not going to go to them and simply say you want peace and you want this to be over. Like, you would be extremely angry. And so that's why when people just automatically go and say, well, Hamas started it. Number one, Hamas is a resistance group. They were established in 1987. When did the Nakba happen? In 1948. And Hamas is only in the Gaza Strip. There's no Hamas in the West Bank. But the West Bank, Palestinians are still getting tortured. They're getting abused. They're getting arrested for the most insane reasons that are just unheard of. Like, if you throw rocks in Palestine or if you throw rocks at soldiers in the West Bank or in Gaza, you can be sentenced to years in prison for simply throwing rocks. So there is no Hamas in the West Bank, but they're still being tortured there and they're still dying there and they're still being abused there. So that's one thing I get kind of very angry when people just talk about Hamas. And right away, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? I just want to I don't want to give off the wrong impression here. I don't support the killing of any innocent children, any innocent people, doesn't matter where they're from. So my heart goes out to the people who passed away or who died or who were murdered in Israel. Like, no innocent life should pass away. So I don't want the impression to go off that I'm happy that that happened. Absolutely not. No innocent life should be lost for no reason. But that being said, if you do not condemn the 75 years of oppression, apartheid, bombing, bombardment, everything, I have no moral obligation to condemn Hamas. If you condemn that, 75 years of torture, by all means, you can ask me if I condemn Hamas, because sure, I will condemn Hamas, no problem. What they did was wrong. But for 75 years, if you're living in inhumane conditions, like, don't tell me you would respond in a peaceful manner, because life in Gaza is nothing like the life we know. Life in Gaza, they are under the military occupation. They have limited access to food, to water, to aid, to electricity. Like, Israel controls everything going on in Gaza, all of the resources, the fuel, everything. So I try to explain to people that I've never heard of, like, they say it's Hamas, but how does another country have complete control of the fuel, the food, the electricity, the water, everything? But the people they have control over, those ones are the supposed terrorists. Like, I never understood that. When living in Gaza, they have little to no electricity. They have a fire outside, and that's how they make their food. There are also people in Gaza, 70% of Gaza is refugees. So Gaza is this hugely overpopulated land, 2.2 million people living in a city smaller than London. It's very overpopulated. And the reason for the just influx of population is because when the 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their land, they were either forced to Egypt, they were forced to Jordan or Syria or Lebanon, or they were forced into Gaza. So Israel kind of took this entire country's population and kind of just stuffed them into one small area. So that's another thing too, is Gaza has so many refugee camps because 70% of the population is already refugees. They had to leave, their home city and force into another one because of this Israeli military occupation force. So yeah, that's kind of what I kind of wanted to shed light on. So far, I think I've kind of went through just the history, and I hope people can understand the history behind it and know that this is not something that started 2 months ago. This has been ongoing for the past 75 years. And our grandparents, every Palestinian's grandparents, were affected by it. They're our parents, once living in their home native land and now expelled and forced to find refuge in another country. But if you guys have any questions or anything like that, I would be more than happy to answer them right now.
Yes, I have a few questions, but first of all, thank you so much for sharing that everything you have. You hear it on the news, you read about it, and it affects you in a way, but when you hear about it, like one-to-one from someone who's actually been affected, it just hits you in a completely different way. So my heart goes out to you, and no amount of apologies from us will ever be enough, but my heart is completely with you and your family and everybody else who is going through unnecessary torture or any sort of oppression that they don't deserve. But jumping off of that, I had a quick question for you regarding Hamas. So you mentioned Hamas is a resistant group, but because of what's been going on recently, there's a whole conversation and the spreading of Hamas being a terrorist group or an extremist group. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that and how you perceive it or what you think about it?
Yeah, for sure. So again, I appreciate your condolences and just your kindness, and I really do appreciate that. But kind of going back to your question about Hamas, they are a resistance group. Of course, the media will paint them out to be terrorists and extremists, and I'm obviously not the spokesperson for Hamas, so I can't really shed light on that exactly. However, yes, they are a resistance group. Like, it's important to note that Palestine has no government. They have no military. There's a reason they're fighting with rocks and stones. They don't have a military. They don't have any of these tanks or guns or anything like that. They don't have it. Like, Israel is fighting a country that doesn't have a military, that has rocks and stones and are fighting with rocks and stones. And so Hamas was established in 1987. Yes, their involvement is the reason why Israel is kind of not holding back right now and is just kind of raining hellfire on Gaza right now. But that being said, there are countless videos, like when Hamas on October 7th took Israeli hostages. There are countless videos of Israeli hostages who were taken that said they treated us right, they respected us, they gave us food, they make sure we were fed. They took care of us. They gave us medicine if we were sick. And they related that to basically saying, we're Muslims, we're believers of God, we will not harm you. Basically, it's a best case scenario for a hostage situation. So I think that's an important thing to know. Israelis have come out and said they treated us fine. And Israel is trying so hard to hide these videos or to claim that Hamas made these hostages say that, which honestly I think is quite ridiculous. But again, there are so many Palestinians that don't want harm to Israel. They just want their land. Like, one side is chanting for the death of all Palestinians, and the other side is chanting for, we just want our land back. We just want to live. We just want to be free. So when one side is chanting death and the other side is chanting freedom, what does that tell you about who is the real terrorist or who is the real prosecutor in this situation? So like Israel and the US, like if you're going to call Hamas a terrorist group, okay, what are Israel and the US doing? So that's kind of my take on that.
That definitely makes sense. Thank you for sharing. Also, just going on off of that and the whole idea of how media is portraying the current events. So they tend to call this whole thing a conflict, like the Israel-Hamas conflict. Would you agree with that wording?
Absolutely not. It is definitely not a conflict. And that's the other thing. I kind of wanted to talk about the history first, but we are witnessing a genocide. It's an ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians. It is absolutely horrible. We are witnessing a genocide through our phones. It's not a conflict, never was a conflict. It's a war and it's a genocide. Israel's main goal is to ethnically cleanse and kill all Palestinians. Gaza is the world's largest concentration camp. A lot of people will refer to it as an open air prison. It's not an open air prison because prison refers to criminals, as in they did something wrong. They did something wrong to be living there. These are innocent families, innocent children, innocent people that just want a life. So to say it's an open air prison, I don't like using that term. It's the largest open air concentration camp because people in Gaza can't get out. They cannot get out. They're stuck there. And they basically, like, my family tells my mom, we have no hope. We just try to make the best out of a bad situation. Like, the simplest things will make them happy. Like, I always say God gave a certain strength to the Palestinians living in Palestine that we will never be able to comprehend or understand. For you to be, living the way they live, they don't have all this running water and electricity and air conditioning and shops and things like that, like, fancy clothing lines, things like that. They make the best out of simple things. And for them, because Gaza is by the water, my mom's uncle's house is about a 15-minute walk from the beach. And they always say, God loves us because he gave us water. He lets us enjoy the beach whenever we want. God, like, for someone else in that situation, for them to have that level of faith is just amazing. So I do always say that their faith and their hope and everything is truly like something out of this world. But unfortunately, they know that at any moment, everything could change. But again, I kind of getting a little sidetracked, but it's absolutely not a conflict. It is a genocide. And it's unfortunate because it seems as though no matter how much we share, how much we talk, some people choose to turn a blind eye and choose to be ignorant. But we are witnessing it through our phones, a genocide right now. So it's not a conflict at all by any means.
Definitely, that makes so much sense.
I was just gonna jump off of that and just say that you're right with the social media. Like, we're presented with so much, honestly, like it's evidence. Like, there's things that we've seen that people can't just create and fake. It's not propaganda on the side of Palestine because we see such horrific things happening. And it's so clear that what's happening is a genocide. It's been established that there have been war crimes, that human rights have been broken, yet still people are able to like shrug that off and even say that like Palestine is not the victim here, but Israel is. And it's really hard for me to understand how that can happen, especially with like it's only the leaders of like specific countries that are standing with Israel, yet they have so much power and attention that nothing is changing because of their stance.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And people are always like, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. And it's no, Israel has the right to do whatever the heck they want without facing any consequences. Israel has broken the most international laws or things, declared by the UN. Israel has broken so many laws, committed so many war crimes, yet no one cares. No one cares. So Israel, they don't defend themselves. They can just do whatever the heck they want under the sun and get away with it. And that's the only way to put it.
Yes, and what's the discussion that's been going on recently is people are trying to defend their actions by saying, oh, they're just reacting to what's been done to them, like reacting to Nazism. But framing Zionism as a reaction to Nazism doesn't sound like accurate because, like you mentioned, even before World War II, Zionism ideology did impact Palestinians. So they're both rooted in European ethno-nationalisms and ethnocentrism. And chronologically speaking, Zionism did emerge first.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's another thing too, is just this whole Zionist ideology for them to just think that they're entitled to this piece of land that people were already living on. This is not your native land. You come, you force people out, you steal their homes. Like Palestinians who are expelled from their home, they wear their house key on their neck because they believe one day they'll return. Like there was a video in 2021 that went pretty viral, and it was just, I think it was the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, but it was a neighborhood in Palestine that was being occupied. So this lady who had been living in that house for generations, her mother, her parents, grandparents lived there, and now she's living there in that house. She was forced out, and an Israeli settler moved in, and she was yelling at him like, you're stealing my house. This is my house and you're stealing it. Like, this is my home. And he just goes, well, if I don't live in it, if I don't steal it, somebody else will. And it's just, again, like the occupation, the apartheid, the forcing them out of their homes, this Zionist ideology that this land was promised to you by God. And if a land was promised to you by God, you would just have it in the first place to begin with. You wouldn't have to brutally murder, terrorize, and bomb for 75 years to get that land. You would have it in the first place. So this Zionist ideology is just incredibly infuriating and very confusing. And that's why I say, like, I have no problem with my Jewish brothers and sisters. I just have a problem with the Zionists. You can be, whether that's a European Zionist, a Jewish Zionist, a France Zionist, like, I don't care. The Zionist ideology is one that is just, it's so infuriating and just difficult to even comprehend their logic and their thinking.
Definitely. And I know exactly which video you're talking about, which made me want to discuss a little bit more about the point you made about us seeing a genocide through our phones. And even like through our phones, what we're seeing and what we witness is done because of Palestinian reporters, because Western media is not portraying events as they are. And they're very like quick to, twist words to fit their own narrative. So what I've noticed is like even in the most vulnerable moments, when somebody's losing their child, when they're carrying their child's body, they don't have a moment to mourn privately because one, they're afraid of their own safety, and two, there's a camera to show that this is actually happening, just to get some piece of sympathy from others, which even then it's kind of depicted as, oh, the whole idea of Pallywood and this is all acting and stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from. Like, there are journalists that document this and that share it with the world, and yet people turn a blind eye. And like you said, they don't even have time to mourn because, especially since October 7th, it has been escalated. Like, it's important to note that even before October 7th, Israel would bomb Gaza on just a random Tuesday if they felt like it. Like, the bombs were just not as consistent and not as much, but they were still, like, my mother and my two younger brothers went to Gaza last August, and they were there, and they were hearing, the bombs coming down and the bombardment and the rockets, and basically whenever they feel like it, they can do whatever they want. And just since October 7th, it's just been more. It's been happening. It's just at a much higher magnitude right now. And as you said, there are journalists documenting this and risking their lives to show the world the truth. in I believe it was in 2021 as well, Israel killed a Palestinian journalist named Shireen. Like, they killed this journalist who shared so much about Palestine, and there's a reason why they wear that, press, like the press vest and the blue. You cannot target journalists, but that's what Israel's been doing. They don't want the world to know the truth. They are trying so hard to hide the truth from the world. Even some of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, basically their families have been imprisoned just so they don't open their mouths and say, they were treated nicely, we're so happy to have them back. Israel will go to enormous lengths just to cover and not show people what they're doing, because they knew if people truly knew the truth, that they would not be able to do what they're doing. They literally have all these programs. They pay, people to come to Israel. They pay for their flights, their stay, everything. And all they ask is just talk good about Israel, and for any person who is not educated on the situation, they'll be like, oh my God, free trip, free stay, free everything. Of course, I'm going to talk up this country, right? But it's important that people really do educate themselves. And that's why I say education is so important, When minds are educated, lives are liberated. Like, that's what I like to say. Because once you do know the truth, you're going to realize the magnitude and the just amount that this situation is just completely horrible. And we can't even ask for a ceasefire. We're praying and praying for a ceasefire. We can't even get that. And people don't really know what the term ceasefire means. It just means that both sides stop firing. Like, that's it. That's only the first step to getting Gaza back to where it used to. Well, granted, it kills me to say this, but I don't think it will ever get back to the way it used to be. But we simply just need the rockets to stop, the bombs to stop. And we can't even get that. Like, we can't even get a ceasefire. I don't understand. And, yes, ceasefire means both sides stop, but in the past 30, 40 days, Israel has fired more rockets on Gaza than Hamas has in 30 years. So I think that's an important statistic to understand as well.
Absolutely. And I know in Ottawa yesterday there was a march or a protest, and there were over 100,000 people that came out to support. And as grateful as I am to see the support of Canadians, the fact that Canada still hasn't called for a ceasefire is extremely upsetting. And it's heartbreaking to see that, like, every second that passes without having called a ceasefire is the result of more and more deaths and people getting injured. And it's really an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And that's the thing. The lives that were lost today, or the lives that were lost yesterday, would not have been lost had a ceasefire been called yesterday. Prime Minister Trudeau cannot even utter the word ceasefire. Now, my mom has been doing a lot of activism work since October 7th, like just speaking on behalf of the Palestinians. And she did actually meet Prime Minister Trudeau in Toronto, and she was speaking with him. He was speaking with a couple other people who have family in Palestine. My mom confronted him and she said, what is the number of people that have to die in order for you to call a ceasefire? Like, call a ceasefire. He goes, this was about 2 weeks ago. And then what he said was, oh, we passed that number 3 days ago. Okay. Like, you passed the number 3 days ago. When are you going to call for a ceasefire? And he's trying to make up these excuses and saying, well, it doesn't mean anything if I say it. I can't say it. And they're like, just call for a ceasefire. Call for it. He's like, it doesn't matter. Basically, coming up with, excuse my language, but stupid excuses for him not to call that ceasefire. He can't even say the word. There was one interview where he goes, we need to see a cease. And then he stopped himself. And then he goes, we need to see a humanitarian pause. You don't pause a genocide, you end a genocide. So it's just, it's so infuriating. And, it's the reason why this is all happening is the US and Israel. Biden and Netanyahu are murderers. They are murderers, and they will never be able to wash their hands of the blood of the thousands and thousands of Palestinians that have passed, not just from October 7th, but since 1948.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, like, we had no clue, but you just shed such important light on a conversation with the Prime Minister himself. I know exactly which video you were referring to with the ceasefire. So we know that like deep down there is a desire or something. We can say that
He has some bit of a conscience,
there we go. Yeah,
maybe.
exactly. But there's other reasons for which he's not speaking out, and that's the same with Biden and the powerful like countries of the world. They have their own motives and their own reasons and greed to
Oil.
not. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And it's, sorry, I'm going to interject for a second, but not just oil, but they want to build a canal that is to go through Gaza. And this canal, I don't know too much about it, but basically, if this canal is created, it will make the US, some countries in Europe, Israel, so much money. And so that's another thing. Money and oil. Like money is the root of all evil because they're okay with spilled blood of thousands, hundreds and thousands of innocent lives if it means they are getting more money. And I can never understand how, like, that's why I say these aren't humans. Biden and Netanyahu are not human. They are the true animals. They call Palestinian animals. They're the animals. They are the savages of this earth. Because for you to put countless and countless Palestinian lives dying just so you can get an influx of income is truly beyond comprehensible.
Yes, and there's not even like a balance in the power dynamics. Like when you see on media the people who are being painted as the victims versus the actual victims. So on social media, there's like people are whining about not getting gluten-free bread for their Israeli soldiers, whereas at the time of like this recording, what Israel has apparently agreed to a 4-day pause. Yet even in this pause, their biggest focus for Palestinians' biggest focus isn't to find gluten-free bread. It's to spend some peaceful time looking for the bodies and their belongings under all the rubble. So they don't even like have that time to just relax.
Absolutely. And like you said, this 4-day pause, I don't believe in a 4-day pause. Notice how convenient it was that 4-day pause was between Black Friday and Thanksgiving. They know that so many people are boycotting right now. And that's another thing I want to quickly say is people in the West feel like they can't do anything, or maybe they don't have the financial means to donate, or, they don't know what to do. Boycott, watch where you spend your dollars. Companies like Disney, Starbucks, McDonald's, those are the bigger companies because obviously you can't boycott everything. Your local grocery store, you can't boycott. You need your groceries. I understand that. But boycott the larger companies. People are dying. People don't have homes. People are freezing from the cold. You can choose a different store where you buy your everyday coffee. So yeah, boycotting is another one. Is a big thing I tell people. Like, you can do something. You watch where you spend your money. You don't want your dollars going and funding a genocide. Now, in terms of the 4-day pause, number one, Israel tried to do as much damage as they could before the pause. So even though this 4-day pause is supposedly happening, it's just a pause from rockets. Palestinians are still being murdered. They're still being shot at. If they just roam the streets looking for the dead bodies of their loved ones, they are getting shot at. Just yesterday, there was a video of an Israeli soldier shooting a Palestinian in the legs for fun. The Palestinian was not doing anything, was not being violent, nothing. There's a sniper and he shot his legs. Like, Israel, this is their way of having fun, which is such pure evil. But yeah, this pause is just pause of rockets, and Palestinians are still being killed. They're still being arrested. They're still being held in prisons. People don't understand that. So many Palestinians are in Israeli prisons, and for no reason. They haven't been convicted, and half of whom are children and people under the age of 18. Like, innocent kids. Israel will arrest toddlers, which is, I can't even understand a toddler. Like, how can you arrest a little innocent baby? But Israel does that, and then they keep them in these prisons. They rob them of their childhood, and they're lucky if they ever make it out. And even when they do make it out, they have all of this PTSD and, developmental issues because they spent so much time of their childhood in solitary confinement. So again, like you said, the gluten-free bread shortage for the Israeli soldiers, that video just absolutely infuriated me. Like, people in Israel are posting TikTok videos that are day in my life war edition, and they're just going about their daily lives. getting gluten-free bread for soldiers, like a day in your life. Like Palestinians don't even have electricity. They're the ones who are truly dying, and you're making fun and making entertainment because you're supposedly at war. You're not at war. Your country is committing a genocide. But yeah, with that being said, it's just completely infuriating. And again, with this pause, it's not a pause. The US economy knows that, or sorry, the US government knows that if people were to boycott Black Friday, the economy would implode. That's what they were terrified of, because we all know Black Friday is when most companies, make their, I don't know if it's break even or they make most of their sales. That's how they kind of get their income for the year. I could be wrong about that, but that's how somebody explained Black Friday to me. They put everything on sale. They make so much money because everyone saves. And then they're like, I'm going to get it on Black Friday when it's on sale. They knew if a boycott was partaking in Black Friday, the economy would implode. So I think that's like the main reason they said this, 4-day humanitarian pause or whatnot. But Palestinians are still being murdered. They still are limiting the aid that's being allowed to be sent into Gaza. On an average day, Gaza needed, I'm not sure the number of trucks, but basically trucks were coming in every day. Like, let's say, for example, it's 100 trucks per day. Now, ever since October 7th, it has been zero aid. The trucks have either been bombed or it's only 20 out of 100 trucks. So 20% of what is normally allowed in is not enough. 20 trucks for 2.3 million people, and trucks that carry things like medical supplies, water, food, things that Palestinians need now more than ever. And only 20% of that is being allowed into Palestine. It's absolutely, it's just horrible.
Definitely. And everything you've said, this is like clear-cut, hardcore evidence. It's factual and it's right there, not even being hidden. And the IOF is even like saying, like admitting that, yeah, this is our objective, yet people are still turning a blind eye. And like you mentioned before, like even within like the 4-day pause, even if there are no like actual bombings, like I don't think that's going to be like 100% no bombings, but still, even if the bombings are like a lot reduced, people will still die because, from the injuries, from their lack of medical care and their lack of supplies, from hunger, thirst, or even like from the contaminated water. So it's not like there will be no deaths recorded because people are still going to die.
Absolutely. Like you said, we don't understand the severity of this, because even Palestinians who were sick before and needed a steady, for example, diabetics who need their insulin, they can die without their insulin. There's now diseases being spread from drinking the contaminated water. They're all malnourished because there's little to no food. And if they do get food, they're eating, bread and rice, which very little nutrients, very little protein. And they're eating, one meal a day. And then the parents are not even eating. Every food they can get their hands on, they give it to their child. So now they're going to be dealing with diseases. They're going to be, having these diseases being spread, could die of starvation, could die from dehydration. Like it's very severe. So we don't really understand that. And the one functioning hospital, which is Al-Shifa Hospital in the north of Gaza, it's under occupation. No one's allowed in, no one's allowed out. We actually have someone from the London community who is a nurse at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. He studied here and he's now a nurse helping out in Gaza. And what he posts, like, it's so terrifying. He's constantly is posting updates on his story, basically letting us know that he's alive. But he's sharing the conditions of the hospital. There are no beds. Everyone's on the floor. They have little to no medical supplies. They're operating with flashlights and without anesthesia. People in Gaza are having surgeries without anesthesia. Women are having C-sections. You're cutting through 7 layers of tissue to get to that baby without anesthesia and without proper medical supplies. And we don't even know if these medical supplies are being sterilized, because they truly have very little supplies and very little aid. And the electricity, Israel cut off the electricity for Al-Shifa Hospital, and 39 newborn babies in the NICU passed away. They died. And so there was this whole misinformation going around that Hamas beheaded 40 babies, and the media just was outraged. They took that and they ran with it. Meanwhile, that was fake, and they had to come out to say that that was misinformation. They had to come out and say this was fake information, this was false. But 39 real babies died. And yet nobody cared. So it's become quite apparent that the blood of Palestinians is cheaper than the blood of other humans, the blood of Israelis. It doesn't matter if 39 babies, Palestinian babies, pass away, but 40 fake Israeli babies being beheaded, that's awful.
Exactly. And you can't just pick and choose what you like want to support and believe in. And it's been crystal clear that not only do the Palestinians just want peace, but that Israel is just like out to get them. And they're treating them like animals when, like you said, they're the ones acting like animals, because humans would have a heart and humanity and a sense of disgust with the things that have been happening. But clearly that hasn't shown. Like, I've seen videos of them celebrating the deaths of Palestinians, like you said, and who would target hospitals? Who would target everything that they need to survive? The trucks, right? It's clear that, like you said, this is a genocide. It's not a conflict. And I think that people need to just evaluate the facts properly and really open their eyes before they just believe whatever they see. Because at this point, especially the mainstream news outlets are just putting forth what they want to fit their narrative, which is not the truth.
Absolutely. And like you said, there are Israelis who literally sit on a higher elevation, like a little hill or a mountain, and they watch the bombs being dropped over Gaza. We've seen messages being written on rockets saying, I hope this kills you. I hope this bombs your home. Like, when one side is chanting for freedom and the other side is chanting for death to everyone on the opposite side, it really shows you who the true terrorists are. Like, for you to be celebrating and making this huge happy like occasion over other people dying, like, I will never understand that. No innocent life should die, should be murdered. And the fact that they're just being so celebratory and acknowledging this as something happy, I will never understand it. It's one of the hardest things for you to actually see these citizens celebrating the death of your people, your loved ones. It's horrible. And it's just, again, like, this whole situation, this whole genocide, we need to see some sort of action. And it's unfortunate because even people in the community, when you say, we want to see action, we want to see something better happening, we want to see a positive thing come out of this, we want to see a pause, we want to see something else. Like, just the other day, my mom was talking to her therapist and she was like, I have faith that this will end. I have faith that we'll come to a peaceful agreement, something along the lines of that. And she responded, mind you, this is a medical professional. This is a therapist who, has a degree and is supposed to be there for the moral support and mental support for her patients. And she says, oh, so you want to see all Jews eradicated? Like, how do you go from your patient having faith to saying that this patient is insinuating that she wants to see all Jews eradicated? I was so shocked that a medical professional would come out and say this. So right away, we reported her, and we reported her for whatever institution she works for. But again, people will assume that when we want to free Palestine, they assume we want death to Jews, which could not be further from the truth. As I said, this has never been a religious war. We want freedom. We want freedom from apartheid. We want freedom from torture. We want freedom from occupation. And they automatically assume that we want death to the other party, which is not true by any means.
It is a huge assumption, and the way they connect that, I also find it incredibly crazy. And you're aware of the saying, from the river to the sea. I've heard people twist that and use it as a way to say that Palestinians are promoting anti-Semitism. And I just don't understand how you can take that phrase and make this wild conclusion that it's about anti-Semitism.
No, absolutely. And that's the next thing I was going to touch on is even our slogans, they have an issue with it. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And they're like, this is anti-Semitism. This is a hate crime against Jews. This is wanting all Jews to die. Like, no, we want Palestine free from the river to the sea. I don't know, like, the way they twist things and the way they just make things act as though everything is attacking them. and they're the victim. It's just amazing. Like Bassam Youssef, I don't know if you guys watched that interview with him and Pierce Morgan, but he said it perfectly. It's like being in a relationship with a narcissistic psychopath. He does you wrong, and then he expects you to apologize for it. Like, I truly don't understand.
Definitely. And just all of the videos and the footage that's emerging from, it's particularly the Gaza Strip right now. It's worse than any horror movies out there or any David Cronenberg movie you would find. And even then, some people, because of this, are using it as an excuse, saying, oh, I'm protecting my mental health by not looking at this, or I'm going to turn off social media right now, which I guess good for you for having the self-awareness. But people in Palestine, the children in Palestine, can't necessarily just tune it out or like look away. And as you mentioned before, these children are going to have PTSD. And as a psych specialist myself, I cannot even fathom the level of therapy that could even like help to minimize any symptoms, judging from the fact that children there, the normal game for them, I don't know if you've seen a video, but I've seen a video of like children playing the martyr game where they're carrying their friends in stretchers and laughing because this is what they see. This is the norm for them, and that is their game. And that's just not, personally, that is not how a child should grow up or what they should witness. So for you to like say you can just look away or sign out of Instagram, that is such a big privilege.
It is a huge privilege, and it's also insensitive, in my opinion. Like, we have these social media stars, these celebrities that basically come on their platforms and say, I need to take a mental health break. Like, I'm sorry that you're tired of seeing it. Palestinians are tired of living it. So we all have the privilege of turning off our phones and taking a break. And we have to acknowledge how much of a privilege that is. Palestinians can't just turn off their phones. They can't just simply take a break. So for you to announce that you're going to take a break for your mental health, I understand mental health is important, but for you to come out and say that while people are going through the unimaginable right now, it's just truly very insensitive. You don't need to announce that you're taking a break for your mental health when there are people going through a genocide. And like you said, Palestinian children, like, as a Muslim, we believe that the people of Palestine, the people who are going through this, they are the people of paradise. We believe that they don't even need to work for their place in paradise just for what they're going through in this life. They are granted paradise. Unlike us in the West, who need to work for our place in paradise, need to make sure that we follow our religion and read the Quran and make sure that we're living a good life according to Islam, to make sure that we earn a spot in paradise. The people of Palestine are the people of paradise. So, when I think about all these deaths, on one hand, it's sad, but on the other hand, I don't feel a sadness in my heart because I know they're in paradise. I know they're with God, and I know they're in the eternal akhirah. They're enjoying the beautiful provisions of heaven. They're at peace. My heart is at ease because I firmly believe with all my heart that they are in paradise and they're enjoying the afterlife. My heart is with the people that are still living in these inhumane conditions, people that are suffering. Like, my heart goes out to them because as a Muslim, like, I believe that everyone who's died, they're in paradise, and I'm at ease knowing that. And there's even an ayah in the Quran that says, don't think the people who have died are dead. They're alive, you just don't perceive it, meaning that they're alive, just not in this life. And it's just so unfortunate because my heart just goes out to the people who are still living. Again, like you said, they can develop post-traumatic stress disorder, all these other, psychological disorders because of what they're going through. And you'll ask children of Gaza, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Simple questions like that. And they'll tell you, well, in Gaza, we don't grow up, or there's nothing for us. We have no hope. They're so strong, but at the same time, they're hopeless. There's nothing for them. They can't grow up and get an education. This year they canceled all the schools. They canceled the school semesters because most of the students died. Imagine schools closing because of the amount of students that have passed away. Like, that is just beyond comprehensible for me. But again, like, you can't even imagine the people who are living, the people that have pre-existing medical conditions, the people that, have been suffering, the people who've had their limbs amputated. People are quadriplegics. They don't have legs. They don't have arms. There are so many children, young children, who don't have limbs because of the bombardment and the type of missiles that Israel fires. Like, you can't even imagine, like, a little baby losing their arm and their leg. They're an innocent child. They shouldn't deserve to lose their limbs because they're innocent. They didn't do anything. So it's extremely sad, and my heart just aches for the people that are still living in these inhumane conditions.
Of course. And like you mentioned, this is not something to do with religion, yet some people are kind of using this as an excuse to perpetuate Islamophobia, which is not it. And even in like mainstream media, the people you see supporting and using their voice are like people of minority groups. And they're also the ones who end up facing consequences rather than people who are really perpetuating the white supremacist narrative, which the double standards are shocking to me. And just jumping off of what you said previously, I just want to say, like, I read something recently, and I think this is so true, is that the Palestinians don't need us, rather we need them.
I know what you mean. And I saw a quote similar to that, and it was, we're not freeing Palestine. Palestine is freeing us, meaning that there's a sense of the faith of the Palestinians after everything they've endured. Like, a normal person would question God, like, why am I going through this? But the Palestinians are so in touch with their faith, have the strongest faith that I have ever seen, a human being have. And another thing, we in Islam, we believe that God doesn't burden a soul with more than it can bear. So we know that there is a certain level of strength and resilience in the Palestinians. Obviously no human can be able to deal with this, but they're so much stronger than us because of everything they're going through. But even people who are not Muslim, even though it isn't a religious war, they look at the faith of these people. These people have such strong faith with God. They're praying in mosques that have been bombed. They're still going to Friday prayer. They're still praying in congregation, worshiping God. For you to have that level of faith after your whole world has torn down, like in the West, we're very blessed. We have electricity, we have food, we can go to the grocery store and buy whatever we like to eat. We can, take baths whenever we want. Like, we are blessed. If that was taken from us from a heartbeat, I don't know if we would have the same level of faith that the Palestinians have. So people are seeing their faith and their strength, and they're going and they're buying Qurans and they're reading about the Islamic faith, and they want to know, wow, these people have literally lost everything, and yet they're so in touch with their faith. I want to know more about this religion that they're so in touch with, even though they've lost everything.
Definitely.
I think religion is super important. I feel like people tend to dismiss the impact of religion, but also going off of what you said, there is another saying that not a saying, sorry, but in the Quran, they also mention that eventually the truth will come out. The light will shed on what actually happened. And I like to look at that and think about that justice will eventually be served for these people. And just knowing that and knowing that they're in a better place definitely puts me at ease. But that's not to say that this has to keep continuing, because what's happening is still not right. Just straight up terrible.
No, I completely understand. And that's one thing that I'm so grateful for Islam, is that we know that one day the truth will come out. There will be justice served. And if it's not in this life, then it's in the next life. We know as Muslims, everything that we've done while living in this life, we're going to be questioned on the day of resurrection. So we know that justice will be served. Maybe not in this life, maybe the next life, but the truth will come out. We don't believe death is the end. And that's another saying, that, you can't defeat a nation that knows death is not the end. A quick example, just in general terms, if a Muslim is killed because of their religion, they're considered a martyr. And if you're considered a martyr in Islam, you enter paradise, like you're guaranteed paradise. So this man, his family, his house was bombed. He was out of the house. His family's house was bombed. All his family passed away. He was giving out sweets because he was so happy that his family went to paradise. He knows his family are considered shuhada, which is the Arabic term for martyrs. And he was giving out sweets because his family was in paradise. Like, to have that level of faith. And then there's another video, I don't know if you guys seen it, but a man holding his dead daughter, his dead child, who was probably maybe 3 to 5 years old. And he's kissing her, and he has a smile on his face, knowing that she's now playing with all the other children in paradise. Like, It's truly amazing to see. And that's, I think, one positive thing out of this is it really does strengthen our faith. And we know that death isn't the end. And we know that bad things need to happen in this life. This life is not perfect. And something that my friend told me that kind of stuck with me a lot was there needs to be a group of people that show the evil actions of others. So, like Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, he is the evil, and the Palestinians are the ones who are basically showing how evil he is because of everything he's doing to Palestine, for example. Now, not to disregard anything that they're going through, it's absolutely terrifying and it's horrible and it's unimaginable, but God always has a plan. God knows what's going to happen. God prepares his servants. He does not burden a soul with more than it can bear. And there's also a saying, well, how is God letting this happen? Why hasn't God done anything, for example? God gives everyone time to repent. He is the most merciful. He is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most gracious, the most merciful. He gives people time to repent before the last day where they're going to meet their eternal fate. He gives everyone time. Don't question when he's going to release his might, because he can and he will. And that's something that definitely strengthened my faith after just watching everything going on in Palestine, just knowing that instead of me kind of questioning it, I just have a stronger faith and a stronger love for God, because I know that number one, he is giving them a strength to be able to deal with this terror. And number two, they're going to meet their eternal fate. And, there are sayings and hadiths in the Islamic faith that say if the believer saw their eternal fate, which would be paradise, they would say, God, I would go over what I went through in this life in a heartbeat if it meant that that would be my end. That's how amazing. We as humans can't comprehend the beauty that is paradise, and the way that they would say, I would do this again in a heartbeat if that meant that that was my end. So I think that's just something really beautiful to witness. Palestine is truly freeing us and allowing us to become closer to our faith.
I totally understand. I've noticed on social media, even though people are using this as an advantage to kind of make people be afraid or turn people against Islam, it's just making people even more curious. I've noticed a couple of public figures buying a Quran just out of curiosity to read more about it. A couple of Caucasian women I found on social media, they just took the Shahada because they converted. So it's not going as badly as I think some political leaders would want it to go.
I completely agree with that. And that's another thing too, is people are just so inspired by the Palestinians and by their faith that they want to educate themselves more on this religion. And like you said, like there are even people that, like you said, they've taken their shahada, they've converted to Islam. And that's, I think, something really, really beautiful about tragedies that happen. Like even after 9/11, the amount of people that were impacted, and it painted Islam to be this horrible extremist faith when it's such a peaceful religion. But the amount of people that actually converted to Islam after 9/11 just shows that people will find the beauty. Like, as much as they try to paint, Middle Easterns and Arabs and Muslims as these extremists, these terrorists, these inhumane people, we follow a peaceful religion and we are people of peace. And no matter how hard they try to hide that, people will find out on their own and they will realize the beauty of Islam. And it's just so beautiful to see people coming close and finding God and God guiding them towards them.
Absolutely. And on that note, I just want to say that there's another side of this. There's been a huge increase in people that have been committing hate crimes and acts of hatred and just Islamophobic actions as well. So to everyone that's listening, I just want to say, please educate yourself before. There's so much that you don't know. There's so much that all of us don't know. But please don't act in ignorance. And what we're seeing on the news is not comprehensive. So again, do your research before you make a judgment about any people and act rationally, because this hate is not justified.
Absolutely. And, just to kind of add to that, to any of my Muslim brothers or sisters that may be listening, as scary as these hate crimes can be, those who wear the hijab, those who go about public in, wearing the hijab, being visibly Muslim, being a visible minority, I can understand being scared, because I think we all feel it, especially after the horrendous attack on the Afzal family in 2021. It really kind of put things into perspective. And the fact that they were killed simply for walking and enjoying family time, it can be scary and it can be terrifying. And you think, every time I'm walking and I see a car, sometimes I think of that. And it absolutely can be scary, but also don't let that affect the pride you have in your faith, because on one hand, it is scary, but on the other hand, you should fear God more than you fear God's creation, and you should be proud of your faith and your ethnicity and your religion. And although it can be scary, wear your faith with pride, wear your hijab with pride, be proud to be Muslim, be proud to be such a beautiful faith. And I know it can be scary, so I'm not going to say don't be scared, because that's just insensitive. We are scared. We are being targeted. We've seen so many hate crimes, even in Western, that are happening right now. And we're like, well, this is my community. This is where I go to school. I could be targeted because people have been targeted at my school. But again, do your research. Never act out because of what someone looks like, what country they're from, what religion they're from, what's the color of their skin. Please just do your research and never, ever act out of hate, because hate is wrong. We're all humans in the end of the day. We are to respect and love one another.
Amazing. That's so well put. Thank you for sharing. As we slowly start to wrap up this episode, I had a question for you personally. So just for you, what does it mean for you to be a Palestinian?
For me, being Palestinian, number one, the utmost pride in where I'm from, pride in my country, resilience, strength. Being Palestinian means not letting go of your heritage and your culture, no matter how much another party tries to make you forget, tries to ethnically cleanse you. We will not be different from our culture. We will always stick with our culture. We will always remember our culture. And there's a reason why I'm learning to cook Palestinian dishes and learn Palestinian cultures, because I want to pass it to my kids one day. So being Palestinian for me is just being very in touch with your culture, being strong, being resilient, having faith that we will return to our homeland, having just a sense of strength and pride in where we come from, no matter what happens. Because there was a time, when my mom moved from the Emirates to Canada, she was told, don't tell people you're Palestinian, don't open political discussions. But we've come such a long way from then to now. We are so proud to be Palestinian. And there's kind of an inside joke with Arabs, and just Palestinians will always mention to you that they're Palestinian, even though that topic won't even be related to the conversation. And, the reason behind that is because Israel has tried so hard to take our culture, take our food, take our slogans, take our music and our dancing and our just things that are part of our culture, the traditional Palestinian culture. And that's the reason why we are proud to be Palestinian. We will always say we're Palestinian and we're proud. So that's what it means to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was so well put. And I personally am just so inspired by you and your strength and your family's strength, everything your mom is doing. Just thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining. Just to continue to wrap things up, I was wondering if somebody listening to this is interested in wanting to do something, wanting to help out. Like you mentioned boycotting earlier. So is there anything else you'd recommend for technically us outsiders? What do you recommend us to do?
So yeah, for sure. A couple things. Boycotting is number one, because that's something that is easy to do, like donating. I would say donating, but some people, we're all students. Some might be living in like by themselves, needing to pay rent and stuff and not have the financial means to donate. So boycotting is number one, because you choose where your dollars go. That's completely in your control. So boycotting is definitely number one. Number two, donating if you have the financial means to do so. Even a donation as small as $5 can go a long way, because if we have 100 people donating $5, that truly does go a long way. Other thing I would say is, if you are a Muslim, prayer and dua is huge. Waking up before the Fajr prayer and praying and making dua for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We are going to be asked on the Day of Judgment what we did to support them, and just us praying for them will go a long way. God has the power to change destiny. God has the power to do everything. So praying is definitely a huge one. The next one I would say would be to not stop talking about it. I notice a lot of people that are maybe Caucasian and are not very cultural. Because as we said, we know the minorities are very pro-Palestine. We all support Palestine. We are all united as one to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine. But some people living in the West, they believe what the media tells them. They are maybe siding with Israel, or they don't know the whole story, is to continue to post on your story, continue to share it, because all it takes is one person to see that, to share it, and then it reaches a whole new audience, because there's still so many people who don't know the full length of the situation, all the history, all the facts. They don't know. So that's another thing I would say is don't stop posting, don't stop educating people, and don't be afraid to ask questions. So that's another thing. And then, of course, educating yourself and others. So if you are someone who falls under that umbrella of just not being educated, don't use that as an excuse to not talk. Go get educated. There are plenty of sources out there that will explain what's happening. And I can list a few people on social media that are very educated and talk about this issue, but following the right people. There are journalists in Palestine that post raw, unedited content of what's going on there right now. So following, Motaz, Aziza, Plestia, and then Bisan, these are all younger reporters that are documenting what's happening in Palestine. My cousin, Sami Sultan, is also a journalist in Palestine. So just following people and seeing the content for yourselves and just educating yourselves. So yeah, boycotting, donating, educating yourself and others. And again, praying is also very important, but that would be my recommendations for taking action.
Thank you so much for sharing that. First of all, I can't imagine it being easy or anywhere close to easy to be speaking about this topic that has affected you so personally. So on behalf of Aggie and I as well, thank you so, so much for sharing everything and for the wisdom that you've provided us with. And as for boycotting, honestly, ever since I've come to realize the support that Starbucks and stuff is giving to them, I don't feel like having a latte anymore. It's so disgusting that I just can't anymore. And I think that this whole thing with boycotting has helped us to rediscover our community and the things it has to offer and not fall into the trap and the powerful companies.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm honestly the same way. Like personally myself, I used to go to Starbucks at least a couple times a week and get my caffeine fix for the day. And ever since the information was revealed, I didn't even have the urge to want to go to Starbucks. So it's like my urge to go just simply stopped. And I was a little bit worried, like, oh, how am I going to deal with this? Which is very insensitive. Like it's quite insensitive to think about, but it's just amazing how you don't even want to be associated with any of those companies that are supporting. Like, I know what you mean. You don't even have the urge to go and buy something from there and give your money to those corporations. But yeah, it's amazing to see that even like once you're told a certain piece of information, you're no longer interested. You no longer want to associate yourselves with that. And it has come a long way, especially in countries in the Middle East. All the Starbucks are empty. No one is going in. It's unfortunately a little bit different in the West. We need to work on our people that don't really know, because I go to school and I see people with their Starbucks cups and I'm like, oh, should I say anything? But their stocks have gone down. Their sales, especially in Middle Eastern countries, their Starbucks are empty. So it truly shows that we're getting somewhere where our voices are being heard. Even with protests and marches and petitions and everything like that, our voices are being heard. We simply just can't stop, because once we stop, people will forget and we will move on. And we will not stop. We will not let the voices of our brothers and sisters be shed aside. We have to keep going. We have to keep working, and we have to keep being that voice for our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I've come to realize as well is how strong the power of our individual choices are. We often underestimate the power that we have, but our simple choices of buying a coffee from somewhere else, they actually go a long way. So I'm very glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people, they say, well, I'm just one person. Okay, said 8 billion people. So for you to use
Exactly.
that excuse, yeah, I'm just one person, you and 8 billion other people. So when we all work together and we all stand united, the people united will never be defeated. So we just have to keep going, keep being united. And we know that our voices are being heard. And we just, again, we can't stop, and we just have to keep working. And hopefully in the near future, we will see changes, positive changes.
Again, as usual, that's so well put. And I love your strength. I love your determination. Like, I'm so grateful to know you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come here today and chatting with us, educating us, and just sharing your experience. So yeah, like Maira said before, like I am very grateful that you chose to do this with us.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate you guys having me. I think these conversations are really important to have. And so I thank you guys for thinking of me and inviting me to come on here and talk about it. I truly do appreciate it. And I hope this, is a form of education for people out there. But thank you so much for having me. It was really nice chatting with you guys again. And yeah, again, thank you just for having me and on your platform and speaking about this.
You've reached the end of another episode of The Hidden Coconuts. Thanks for listening.
Be sure to check out our Instagram at The Hidden Coconuts for bloopers, more of our wandering thoughts, and a chance to be a guest on our show. We love to discuss and tackle everyday coconut quandaries, so stay tuned, and we'll see you on top of the coconut tree soon.